It is with deep sadness that I address you today. The royal family has been hit by an emotional storm. The public's perception of the British royal family is evolving. Princess Catherine was clearly shaken. She is among the most well-known women on the planet, a princess, a fashion icon, and an advocate for philanthropic causes. The terrible announcement that King Charles had left abruptly and unexpectedly came just moments ago. I shall no longer be able to devote as much of my time and energy to the causes that I hold in such high regard. Witnesses report that once the seriousness of the situation became clear to Catherine, she broke down in tears, sending shockwaves of bewilderment and sadness around Buckingham Palace. What then might have motivated Charles to pull off such a daring move? What effect will this have on the future of the monarchy? We learn the real story behind this dramatic royal outburst today. He vanished the night the crown fell silent. The man who had waited for decades to hold the throne, King Charles, had broken the monarchy's meticulous facade of control with an irrevocable action. The palace had previously experienced illness, betrayals, scandals, and bereavement, but never before has there been such an abrupt, quiet, and unsettling departure. Light burst into rooms that had been silent since the late Queen's funeral. Within minutes, entire wings were locked down. Tension rose like a tidal tempest as seasoned employees, who often moved with steady serenity, sped down marble corridors, their faces devoid of color. Without any ceremony, press, or explanation, the king's motorcade quietly passed through the North Gate in the middle of the night, a spectral caravan that hinted at something much more than a prearranged withdrawal. Courtiers and trusted advisors started making encrypted phone conversations. The voices were hurried and clipped. Through private channels, words like transition, secure, and containment reverberated. It had a practice sound, as though the writings had been saved for a stage that the audience was unaware of. The royal itinerary, meanwhile, disappeared. Audiences, ceremonies, and appearances were removed from the official schedule, wiped off as though they had never been thought of. Before they were taken down as well, journalists, onlookers, and regular individuals took screenshots and shared them. Rumors of a medical emergency were sparked by royal physicians rushing via private corridors shortly before the blackout. The king has been diagnosed with cancer, according to breaking news from Buckingham Palace. But why the secrecy if it were just health? Why the quiet and the strict lockdown? Answers were less common than questions. This abrupt absence seemed like a break for a family that has depended on protocol and calculated words. By controlling perception, the monarchy has weathered previous crises. This night, however, revealed a new vulnerability, an organization that appeared to have been taken aback by its own disintegration. The royal household's trajectory has been altered by whatever transpired inside those fortified walls that evening. Generations to come will be affected, and the monarchy will be viewed differently globally as a result of the newfound scrutiny. The question that is currently raging throughout Britain and beyond is straightforward yet horrifying. Was this the beginning of a truth the crown can no longer conceal, or was it the peaceful conclusion of a rainstorm? The world stopped breathing that night. Journalists and insiders did not cause the initial waves of terror outside the palace walls. They were from regular people, as they frequently did. A few late-night viewers who were live streaming the grounds of Buckingham Palace saw something odd. Shortly after midnight, a fleet of streamlined black cars, unmarked but unquestionably royal, crept out via the North Gate. The internet was ablaze with live feeds and tweets in a matter of minutes. Something's happening at Buckingham, one post read. Moments later, another appeared. The king's gone. Those three words spread like wildfire, igniting shock across the globe. By dawn, the world's media had descended upon London like a storm. Helicopters hovered, lights flashed, and reporters shouted questions into the night air. Every camera was fixed on the palace gates. Every newsroom demanded answers, but none came. It wasn't the serene silence of royal control. It was the tense, breathless quiet before a storm. Inside the walls, fear replaced formality. The monarchy's fragile balance, carefully held together by appearances and diplomacy, was unraveling faster than anyone could contain. Staff moved in hushed panic, sealing letters, canceling meetings, whispering orders. "Do not speak," came the chilling command that swept through the corridors. It wasn't a retreat, it was the breaking point, the spark that would expose every buried secret, every fracture hidden beneath centuries of royal polish. When Prince William finally faced the press hours later, he looked like a man standing on the edge of collapse. His knuckles whitened around the podium, his voice trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. Gone was the poised, composed heir who had weathered royal scandals and sorrow. Before the world stood William the son, not the future king. His words, grief-stricken and sharp, confirmed the unthinkable. King Charles had walked away without warning, leaving his family and his kingdom stunned. The world held its breath, watching the House of Windsor tremble, and the question that echoed from London to every corner of the globe was one no one dared answer. Had Britain just witnessed the fall of its crown? Keep watching as we uncover every detail. The speech that shook the crown he began slowly, each word heavy, deliberate, and trembling with restrained emotion. This was a decision none of us were prepared for, he said, his voice carrying through televisions and phones across the world. That one line cracked the illusion of royal unity that Buckingham Palace had worked so hard to protect. His tone wavered between disbelief and quiet fury, and for the first time, the mask of monarchy slipped. Then came the words that froze a nation. We were kept in the dark. 6 simple words, but they hit like thunder. If the heir to the throne himself had been blindsided by his father's decision, what else was being concealed behind the palace gates? Across the country, jaws dropped. What began as a royal address quickly spiraled into something far more explosive, a moment of truth no one had anticipated. William's voice hardened as he went on. He spoke vaguely of forces beyond our control, of pressures that had left his father with no choice. It was an ominous hint, suggesting unseen hands and secret deals at play behind the king's shocking exit. He didn't name names, but he didn't need to. The mere suggestion of hidden power struggles sent shockwaves through every newsroom and living room in Britain. Every pause in his speech was dissected, every glance replayed in slow motion. Was he holding back tears, or something far darker? Analysts speculated, commentators debated, and social media erupted. Theories ranged from political interference to deep family betrayal. Behind palace doors, aides scrambled in panic. This wasn't the speech they had approved. William had abandoned the carefully written script meant to soothe the public. Instead, he spoke from the heart, unfiltered, raw, human. His unscripted honesty unleashed chaos. But beneath the emotion, one truth was clear. This wasn't the voice of a polished royal. It was the voice of a son demanding the truth. As the echoes of his words spread across the world, one question lingered like a ghost over the monarchy. What could drive a king to walk away from his crown and from his own son? Keep watching to find out. Vanishing of Queen Camilla. Behind the palace's closed doors, quiet leaks began to spread like ripples in still water. Insiders whispered that Queen Camilla had been completely excluded from all high-level crisis meetings since the night King Charles disappeared. Her name no longer appeared on guest lists, her advisors weren't called in, and her private office sat silent. For a woman who had fought tirelessly to earn her place within royal power, that absence was not a coincidence. It was exile unfolding in plain sight. The British tabloids wasted no time turning mystery into mania. Front pages screamed of betrayal, secret power struggles, and emotional confrontations behind the gilded gates. Some claimed Camilla had played a direct part in Charles' shocking decision to walk away, while others painted her as the victim of a sudden and cruel abandonment. With no statement from the Queen Consort herself, every rumor gained traction. Silence became the loudest sound in Britain. Online, the world erupted. Hashtags like #Where'sCamilla and #Palace. Silence surged across social media, each post feeding the fire. Some demanded transparency, accusing the monarchy of hiding the truth. Others celebrated her disappearance, calling it karma for decades of royal controversy. But inside the palace, the mood was anything but celebratory. Portraits of Camilla were quietly taken down. Her loyal aides were reassigned or dismissed overnight. It was as if she'd been erased from royal life altogether. For the monarchy, the timing couldn't have been worse. The king had vanished, the queen was missing, and the crown's silence was tearing apart the fragile trust of the people. What once looked like a family crisis was now a full-blown constitutional nightmare. And while confusion consumed the palace, one figure watched in steely silence: Princess Anne. Her loyalty to the institution burned brighter than her patience for deceit. To her, Charles' departure wasn't a mystery, it was treachery, and she would not let it stand. But could Princess Anne's defiance be the monarchy's last hope, or the spark that finally brings it crashing down? Princess Anne breaks the royal silence. In one unforgettable moment, Princess Anne did what no royal before her had dared. She shattered the silence and let the world glimpse the storm tearing through the palace. For decades, Anne had been the monarchy's quiet backbone, steady, hard-working, and resolutely private. She was the one who showed up, kept her head down, and never courted scandal. But that lifelong restraint vanished. The instant silence began to feel like betrayal, and Anne Windsor was not the kind of woman who stood by while truth was buried beneath royal decorum. When the palace press office froze, afraid of every possible misstep, Anne took command. She insisted on addressing the nation herself, her voice carrying the calm authority of a woman shaped by service, duty, and loss. What came next wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. Standing beneath the royal crest, she began with dignity, speaking of honor, of the weight of heritage, and of her mother's steadfast leadership that had once united a nation. Then her tone hardened, the warmth faded, replaced by steel. She spoke of manipulation, of unseen hands steering royal decisions, and of those who serve ambition before loyalty. She didn't have to name them. The implication was unmistakable. Her words suggested that Charles hadn't freely stepped down, but had been pushed, forced out by powers within the very system meant to protect him. The reaction was instant. The palace's carefully polished tale of a peaceful transition crumbled overnight. Headlines blazed, commentators hailed Anne as the conscience of the crown, and the last Windsor with nothing left to lose. Every line of her speech was replayed and dissected. The crack in her voice, the pause before she whispered, betrayal, the shimmer of grief that betrayed the sister beneath the steel. To the world, she became both heroine and harbinger, a woman exposing a dynasty built on secrets. But in the quiet after her words, one question lingered like smoke. Had Anne just saved the monarchy, or set its end in motion? The sister who would not stay silent. Those who truly knew Princess Anne could see what lay beneath her composure, pain wrapped in steel. She had always been the family's backbone, the one who endured quietly while others faltered. Her bond with Charles was never warm, but it was unbreakable in its own way, a connection forged through shared duty and lifelong expectation. For her, his sudden departure from the throne was more than a constitutional earthquake. It was a personal betrayal, a wound carved not by politics, but by blood. Her voice, firm yet trembling with emotion, carried that ache. It was the sound of a sister watching her brother consumed by forces she could no longer control. The moment her statement aired, something unexpected happened. Across the country, people felt her pain. They saw in her not just a princess, but a human being fighting to defend what was left of her family's honor. Crowds began to form outside royal residences, holding hand-painted signs that read, "Stand with Anne." Social media, once overflowing with speculation and conspiracy, shifted almost overnight. Hashtags praising her courage trended worldwide. For a brief fragile moment, Anne became the anchor of a monarchy adrift in chaos, not through power or position, but through conviction. Her message was simple, undeniable. The truth will no longer hide behind royal walls, but truth has consequences. Her words, while clarifying, also ignited the storm she feared most. The nation, already uneasy, now had a voice to follow, and an enemy to suspect. As dawn broke over London, Britain awoke not to headlines, but heartbreak. Outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered beneath a cold October sky, candles flickering against the mist. Church bells tolled softly as flags hung low, and the country's sorrow began to harden into suspicion. Who had forced the king's hand? Who was truly in control? The monarchy's image, once a symbol of endurance, now trembled under the weight of uncertainty. What began as mourning soon became a movement. Candlelight turned into protest, grief into questions, and silence into defiance. For the first time in generations, the heart of Britain's royal family no longer beat with unity, but with doubt. The hashtags that shook the crown. It began online, as so many modern revolutions do. Within hours of the king's disappearance, social media became a battlefield of outrage and speculation. Hashtags like hashtag where is the truth, hashtag forced exit, and hashtag speak palace flooded timelines across the globe. Millions demanded transparency, their posts echoing the same question: what really happened to King Charles? Commentators from every corner, political analysts, royal watchers, and cultural icons joined the debate, dissecting every official word, every timeline, every suspicious silence. What had once been the palace's greatest weapon, its silence, now felt like guilt. Each passing hour without an explanation chipped away at centuries of trust. Journalists drew bold comparisons to Edward VIII's abdication, but this time, the story wasn't wrapped in romance or scandal. Charles' exit reeked not of love lost, but of power plays and hidden hands. Whispers of manipulation replaced the language of duty. History, it seemed, was repeating itself, not as tragedy or farce, but as a quiet coup cloaked in royal decorum. Then came the leaks. Reporters uncovered mismatched schedules, missing memos, and advisors who were supposedly present but proven, by flight records, to be miles away. Two conflicting versions of reality were emerging, one official, one buried. The cracks between them widened by the day. Behind closed doors, the government braced for impact. Whitehall discussions turned uneasy. Legal advisors were summoned to prepare for outcomes that hadn't been considered since the 1930s. Could the monarchy withstand another rupture? Could the people's faith survive another secret? For ordinary citizens, this was more than a political crisis, it was personal. The royal family had long been the nation's constant, a symbol of endurance through war and loss, but in the chill of an October dawn, that belief began to crumble. Candlelight vigils evolved into marches. Sorrow turned to anger. The people wanted truth, not tradition, and into that storm stepped William and Catherine, calm, composed, and perfectly poised. To the world, they looked like Britain's next chapter, but behind their serene smiles, a deeper question whispered through the crowd. Were they rising to lead, or stepping into a role long prepared for them? The calm, after the crown fell, as the palace struggled to contain the fallout from King Charles' sudden departure, and the nation wavered between grief and anger, two figures quietly stepped forward from the chaos. William and Catherine, steady, composed, and united, became the faces of a monarchy on the edge of collapse. In a time when the royal institution seemed fractured beyond repair, their presence offered something Britain desperately needed: order. Together, they attended vigils, spoke softly to mourners, and addressed the public with words that blended sympathy with certainty. Every appearance, every gesture seemed calculated to project calm. They didn't merely occupy the empty throne, they stabilized it. Behind the scenes, palace aides worked in panic. Meetings ran late into the night, statements were rewritten, and secrets threatened to spill. Yet amid the chaos, William and Catherine appeared unshaken. Their movements were deliberate, their tone measured, their timing precise, as if they had anticipated this storm long before it broke. Their speeches balanced sorrow with resolve, their expressions communicating quiet determination. Catherine especially became the emotional heartbeat of the monarchy. Her grace under pressure, and her calm presence before restless crowds, transformed her into a living symbol of continuity. To the people, she was not just the Duchess or future queen, she was reassurance personified. But within palace walls, whispers grew louder. Insiders spoke of detailed contingency plans, drafted months earlier, frameworks for an emergency royal transition that suddenly seemed prophetic. Advisors recalled closed-door meetings where hypothetical scenarios now looked more like predictions. The couple's seamless response, their perfectly coordinated rise, no longer felt like improvisation, it felt deliberate. Some within the royal circle believed they were simply stepping into a vacuum they hadn't created. Others suspected that this had been quietly prepared, piece by piece, long before the king's exit. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the monarchy had found its new center. The world watched as William and Catherine stood where uncertainty had reigned, their calm, commanding a nation desperate for stability. But beneath their composure lingered one haunting question: was this destiny or design? The clause that changed everything. As whispers of conspiracy drifted through Buckingham Palace, a growing number of skeptics began to question whether William and Catherine's graceful rise to power was destiny or something quietly engineered behind closed doors. Their poise, once celebrated as the mark of true leadership, now seemed suspiciously flawless. For years, they had been the picture of royal restraint, devoted service, carefully planned appearances, and a spotless image that no scandal could touch. But in the wake of King Charles' abrupt departure, that same perfection began to look rehearsed. To the public, this was their moment of triumph. The monarchy had faltered, and they had stepped forward with unshakable calm. Yet beneath that polished surface, rumors stirred. Perhaps the crown they now wore rested on fragile ground. Then came the revelation that turned quiet doubt into uproar. Deep within the palace archives, hidden inside early drafts of the king's final address, lay a single erased line, a clause that never reached the public. When fragments of the original document were leaked, the nation's faith in the official story shattered. Charles' abdication, it seemed, had not been as voluntary as people believed. The missing clause referred to conditions of succession, legal terms that hinted the transition to William came with stipulations. Someone, somewhere, had deliberately made them disappear, and only one person was rumored to have read the full, unedited version: Princess Anne. What she knew could determine whether the monarchy stood tall or fell apart entirely. The media erupted. Analysts dissected every leaked word, tracing drafts, time stamps, and edits. How could such a crucial clause vanish without a trace? Was it an act of loyalty or manipulation? Whatever the answer, one truth was undeniable: the story of the crown had been rewritten in secret. And if that lost clause ever came to light, would it expose a family's hidden truth, or bring down the throne itself? The weight of a hidden truth. Princess Anne had always been known for her restraint, a woman of principle who valued action over spectacle. But when reports surfaced that she had reviewed King Charles' original abdication document before it was altered, the world suddenly saw her in a different light. Palace insiders confirmed that she had raised serious concerns about its language and what it implied for the future of the crown. That revelation changed everything. Anne was no longer just the monarchy's voice of reason, she had become its most dangerous keeper of truth. If anyone knew what the missing clause contained, and why it had been erased, it was her. Overnight, public attention shifted toward her. Commentators filled the airwaves with speculation. Would Anne reveal what she knew, or would palace loyalty force her into silence? Every word she had spoken in defense of her brother now carried a haunting double meaning. For decades, Anne had stood as the royal family's anchor, steadfast, practical, immune to gossip. But this was different. With Britain divided, and the palace drowning in secrecy, she faced an impossible moral choice. Should she protect the institution her family had built for centuries, or expose the betrayal that had hollowed it from within? The crown's fate no longer rested on William's speeches or Charles' decisions, it rested on Anne's conscience. In the days following the leak,
Her sudden disappearance from public view sparked fresh waves of speculation. For a woman famed for discipline and consistency, her absence was deafening. Aides described tense meetings behind closed doors, whispered debates, guarded glances, and the unmistakable pressure of history closing in. Anne consulted her most trusted confidants, wrestling with questions that had no right answers. Speaking out could destroy everything. Remaining silent could make her complicit in a lie too heavy to bear. Her advisors urged caution, warning her that one wrong word could ignite a constitutional crisis. But Anne had never been one to bow easily. Those who knew her best said that behind her quiet composure, something fierce was stirring. Not rebellion, but reckoning. Would she choose loyalty to the crown or truth to the people? The moment that changed everything. For decades, Princess Anne had stood just beyond the spotlight, the embodiment of quiet duty and discipline. She never sought drama, never courted attention, yet now, silence had turned against her. What was once her greatest strength had become a weapon used to shield lies, and she could no longer bear to wield it. Her inner turmoil transformed her in the eyes of the world. The once unyielding Princess Royal, known for her composure and steel, was suddenly human, vulnerable, torn and visibly burdened by truth. Reports of sleepless nights, private consultations, and emotional strain painted a portrait of a woman standing on the brink of an irreversible choice. Would she protect the crown's stability or its integrity? Outside the palace gates, the air was charged with anticipation. Crowds gathered not for ceremony, but for clarity. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers that Anne had been the last to see King Charles' original statement, that she had confronted senior courtiers behind closed doors. Every theory, every headline tightened the suspense. Her silence, once respected, now thundered louder than any speech could. Behind heavy palace doors, Anne labored over her words. Every sentence was a calculation, every pause a test of conscience. This was more than a statement, it was a turning point that could reshape centuries of royal history. She knew that once she spoke, there would be no return. And then, under the palace crest and before a nation holding its breath, she did. No ceremony, no caution, just the truth. Her tears glistened against an unflinching stare as she revealed what the world had only guessed. The missing clause, the manipulation, the betrayal that had forced her brother's hand. The monarchy, stripped of its pageantry, stood naked before its people. What Anne unleashed could never be contained again. And as her final words echoed across Britain, one question burned in every heart. Had Princess Anne just saved the crown or destroyed it forever? The confession that shook the crown, she confirmed what the nation had only dared to whisper. There was indeed a hidden clause in King Charles' original statement, and it wasn't a minor oversight. It was a sentence powerful enough to alter the entire course of royal succession. With calm precision, revealed that this clause contained specific conditions Charles had placed on the future of the crown, conditions that had been deliberately removed before the public ever saw the final draft. Then came the moment that froze the kingdom. With unflinching resolve, named the senior figures who had pressured her brother to step down, the architects of the quiet coup that had unfolded behind the palace walls. Her words detonated like thunder. For weeks, the public had speculated and theorized, but now they were hearing the truth, clear, verifiable, undeniable. Across Britain, rippled through every household, crowds gathered outside the palace, watching in stunned silence as her statement echoed across every screen, radio, and phone. Within minutes, social media ignited. Hashtags bearing her name dominated global trends, some calling her a hero, others calling her reckless, but one sentiment united them all: admiration for the woman who had shattered the royal code of silence. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's continued absence became deafening. Her empty seat at official meetings fueled darker suspicions: exile, disgrace, or deliberate removal. Every unanswered question about her role now carried new gravity, amplified by Anne's revelations. Then came the response from William and Catherine. Their usual composure could not hide the storm behind their eyes. Their statement was careful, respectful, yet cautious, neither confirming nor denying Anne's claims. The unity they once symbolized now trembled under the weight of revelation. The monarchy stood at a crossroads: rebirth through truth or destruction through denial. Anne's courage had dragged centuries of secrecy into the light, and there was no turning back. And that's where we'll leave this royal storm for now. What do you think? Hero or rebel? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breaking royal revelations.